Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stared at the dim screens inside the mining station control room. The year was 2387, and humans had been slaves to the Zephyrian Imperium for over 300 years. Every morning, Jake watched as hundreds of human workers walked into the dark tunnels to dig precious crystals that powered Zephyrian warships. Every evening he counted how many came back out alive. The Zephyrians were tall beings made of living crystal who ruled 12 star systems with an iron fist. They had conquered humanity when Earth was still learning to travel between planets. Now human colonies existed only to serve their alien masters. Jake had never seen Earth, but his grandmother told him stories before she died in the mines. Katie Sullivan entered the control room carrying a data pad. She was Jake's second in command and the smartest person he knew. Katie had learned to read Zephyrian language by watching their computer systems during her work shifts. She could hack into their basic networks without being caught. "The transport ships are loading more workers for the Titan system," Katie said quietly. "They're taking children this time. Some as young as 12. Jake clenched his fists. The Zephyrians treated humans like tools that could be replaced when they broke. Children meant nothing to them except smaller hands that could reach into tight spaces in the mines. He had been 12 when they took him from his parents. He never saw them again. "How many resistance cells do we have contact with now?" Jake asked while checking the door to make sure no guards were listening. 17 groups across 3 systems, Katie replied. "But most of them only have a few dozen people and basic weapons made from mining tools." Jake nodded. The human resistance was scattered and weak. Each group focused only on staying alive and avoiding Zephyrian attention. They had no real weapons, no military ships, and no way to fight back against an empire that controlled thousands of warships. The communication device on Jake's desk made a soft beeping sound. He pressed the button and spoke in a whisper. "This is Morrison." The voice that came through the speaker belonged to Ben Carter, a human who worked in the Zephyrian Command Center on their capital world. Ben had been pretending to be a loyal slave for 15 years while secretly gathering information for the resistance. "Jake, I have urgent news." Ben's voice was shaking. "The Zephyrians are planning something they call the final cleansing." "I saw the orders myself." Katie moved closer to hear better. Jake felt his stomach turn cold. "What kind of orders?" he asked. "They're gathering their entire armada at Zephyr Prime," Ben continued. "Every warship in the Empire is being called back to the home system. Supreme Admiral Kethvar is commanding the operation personally." Jake had heard stories about Kethvar. The Zephyrian military leader had never lost a battle in his 1,000 years of service. His flagship, called Eternal Dominance, was said to be the most powerful warship in the known galaxy. If he was taking personal command, then something big was happening. "What are they planning to cleanse?" Katie asked into the communicator. Ben's voice became even more quiet. "All human settlements that have shown any sign of resistance activity. They have a list of 47 colonies, including yours. The plan is to attack all of them at the same time so no one can escape or warn the others." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. The Zephyrians had finally decided that humans were more trouble than they were worth. After 3 centuries of slavery, they were going to commit genocide against his entire species. "How long do we have?" Jake asked. 6 weeks, Ben replied. "Maybe less. The Armada is already assembling, and they're loading special planet killer weapons onto the largest ships." Katie grabbed Jake's arm. Her face was pale with fear. "We have to warn the other colonies," she whispered. Jake shook his head. "Warn them." "To do what? Run where?" "The Zephyrians control all the hyperspace routes and every habitable system. There's nowhere to hide from an empire that spans half the galaxy." The communicator crackled again. "Jake, there might be another option," Ben said. "But you're not going to like it. Tell me." "Fight back, all of you together. I've been studying their military plans for years. The Zephyrians have one weakness they don't even know about." Jake almost laughed. "Ben, they have 10,000 warships. We have converted mining equipment and cargo haulers." "It would be suicide, maybe," Ben replied. but it's better than waiting here to die. And Jake, I think I know how you might actually have a chance. Katie was looking at Jake with desperate hope in her eyes. Around them, the mining station continued its daily routine of slavery and suffering. Human workers walked past the windows with their heads down and their spirits broken after generations of oppression. Jake realized that Ben was right. They could hide and die as slaves or fight and die as free humans. Either way, the Zephyrians planned to kill them all. But if they fought back, they might save some human lives even if they couldn't save their own. "What do you need us to do?" Jake asked into the communicator. "Gather every resistance cell you can contact," Ben said. "Every ship, every weapon, every person willing to fight. Meet me at the coordinates I'm sending you. We're going to do something the Zephyrians will never expect." Jake looked at Katie, who nodded grimly. "Send the coordinates," Jake said. "We'll start contacting the other cells tonight." As Ben's transmission ended, Jake stared out at the stars visible through the control room window. Somewhere out there, the most powerful military force in the galaxy was preparing to destroy his people. In 6 weeks, every human settlement would face annihilation, but Jake Morrison was done being a slave. Jake Morrison's cargo ship drifted through the asteroid field near the outer edge of the Centauri system. He had been traveling for 2 weeks trying to convince other resistance leaders to join his impossible plan. So far, the results were not encouraging. Katie Sullivan sat beside him, reviewing the list of contacts they had made. "Commander Lisa Grant refused to meet with us," she said while reading from her datapad. "She says bringing all the resistance groups together would just make it easier for the Zephyrians to kill everyone at once." Jake rubbed his tired eyes. Grant commanded the largest human fleet they knew about, nearly 200 converted cargo ships and mining vessels. Without her support, the plan would never work. "What about Colonel Hayes?" he asked. "He agreed to meet, but only because his people are desperate," Katie replied. "His group consists mostly of escaped prisoners who stole Zephyrian military shuttles during a transport accident. They have good ships, but Hayes thinks we're all going to die anyway." The communication system beeped with an incoming message. Jake activated the screen and saw the weathered face of Ryan Hayes appearing before them. The former prisoner had scars across his left cheek from Zephyrian torture devices. "Morrison, I'm at the coordinates your friend Ben sent," Hayes said. "But I don't see any secret base here, just a bunch of rocks floating in space." "Look for the largest asteroid with metal deposits," Jake replied. "Ben said he's been preparing this place for months." Hayes nodded and cut the transmission. Jake guided their ship deeper into the asteroid field, following the navigation beacon Ben had given them. After an hour of searching, they found an opening cut into the side of a massive space rock. Inside was a hollowed-out chamber large enough to hold dozens of ships. Ben Carter was waiting for them at the docking port. Jake hadn't seen his old friend in person for 5 years. Ben looked older and thinner, but his eyes still held the same determined fire that Jake remembered from their childhood. "Welcome to our new home," Ben said as they walked through corridors carved from solid rock. "I've been using stolen Zephyrian construction equipment to build this place. It's completely hidden from their sensors." The main chamber was impressive. Ben had created workshops, living quarters, and even a command center with stolen alien technology. Several other ships were already docked, including Hayes military shuttles and some vessels Jake didn't recognize. Colonel Hayes met them in the command center. He was a tall man with gray hair and the bearing of someone who had survived years in Zephyrian prison camps. "Morrison, I'll be honest with you," he said. "My people followed me here because they have nowhere else to go. But fighting the entire Zephyrian armada is insane." "Maybe," Jake replied. "But Ben says he has a plan that might actually work." Ben activated a holographic display showing the Zephyrian home system. "I've been studying their military operations for 15 years. He began, "The Zephyrians have incredible technology and overwhelming numbers, but they have one critical weakness." Hayes crossed his arms. "Which is what exactly?" "They're predictable," Ben said. "Zephyrian society is based on rigid hierarchy and absolute obedience. They follow the same battle formations, use the same tactics, and never expect their enemies. to do anything unexpected. Katie leaned forward to study the display. So, our advantage is that we're desperate and crazy enough to try something they won't anticipate. Exactly, Ben replied. While their armada is gathering at Zephyr Prime, preparing for the final cleansing, their home system will be less defended than it's been in centuries. If we attack there directly, we might catch them completely off guard. Hayes shook his head. Even if we surprise them, they still have thousands of ships. We might have, 50 vessels total if we're lucky. Most of them are cargo haulers and mining ships. That's where Amy Rodriguez comes in, Ben said with a smile. A woman Jake didn't recognize stepped forward from the shadows. She was young with short dark hair and oil stains on her work clothes. I'm an engineer, she said simply. I've been working with salvage Zephyrian technology for 3 years. Amy activated another display showing technical schematics. I've figured out how to modify human ships with captured alien weapons and shield generators. The process is dangerous and unstable, but the results are impressive. How dangerous? Jake asked. About half the ships explode during the modification process, Amy replied matter-of-factly. But the ones that survive become powerful enough to fight Zephyrian warships on equal terms. Hayes whistled softly. 50-50 odds of dying before we even reach the battle. Those are terrible odds. Better than 0% chance of survival if we do nothing. Katie pointed out. Over the next few days, more resistance groups arrived at Ben's hidden base. Some came willingly after Jake contacted them directly. Others arrived as refugees fleeing Zephyrian crackdowns on their home colonies. The population of the asteroid base grew to over 3,000 people. Jake was surprised. When Lisa Grant finally arrived with her fleet, the veteran commander docked her flagship and immediately requested a meeting with Jake and the other leaders. I changed my mind, Grant said without preamble. My scouts report that Zephyrian ships are already moving toward human colonies. The final cleansing is starting early. Ben checked his stolen communication equipment and confirmed Grant's report. They've moved up the timeline, he said grimly. We have maybe 3 weeks before the attacks begin. Grant looked around the command center at the assembled resistance leaders. I brought 200 ships and 800 crew members. If we're going to die fighting, I'd rather die trying to hurt them instead of hiding in some asteroid field. Jake felt a surge of hope for the first time in weeks. With Grant's ships, they would have a real fleet. Small by Zephyrian standards, but large enough to potentially cause some damage. Amy Rodriguez had been working around the clock with her engineering teams to modify as many ships as possible with the stolen alien technology. The process was indeed dangerous and several vessels were lost in explosive failures. But the ships that survived the modifications were transformed into something approaching real warships. We'll never be able to match their numbers, Hayes said during a planning meeting. But if we can hit them hard and fast, we might be able to disrupt their operations long enough to save some human lives. Jake studied the tactical displays showing possible attack routes to the Zephyrian home system. Every simulation ended the same way, with the human fleet being destroyed. But Ben was right about one thing: if they were going to die anyway, they might as well make it count. How many ships do we have ready for combat? Jake asked Amy. 43 vessels have been successfully modified, she replied. Another 30 are still in progress. We lost 22 to explosions during the upgrade process. Katie did the math quickly. So if everything goes perfectly, we'll have maybe 70 combat-capable ships against the most powerful military in the galaxy. Jake looked around at the faces of the people who had chosen to follow his desperate plan. Former miners, escaped prisoners, cargo haulers, and civilian refugees who had never fired a weapon in anger. They were about to attempt something that military strategists would call suicide, but they were also free humans making their own choice for the first time in 3 centuries. Win or lose, they would face their enemies as equals rather than slaves. Amy Rodriguez stood in the asteroid base, engineering bay, watching her team install the final modifications on a converted mining vessel. Sparks flew from welding equipment as Chris Miller and Sarah Johnson worked to attach Zephyrian plasma cannons to the ship's hull. The weapon systems were twice the size of anything the ship was designed to carry. "Will it hold together during combat?" Jake Morrison asked as he approached the work area. Amy wiped grease from her hands before answering. "Maybe. The power requirements are enormous and the structural stress could tear the ship apart. But if it works, this little mining hauler will have more firepower than a Zephyrian destroyer." Jake nodded and moved to the next workstation where Danny Clark was installing shield generators inside what used to be a civilian transport. Danny was a former cargo pilot who had volunteered to help with the most dangerous modifications after his family was killed during a Zephyrian raid. "How are the shields coming along?" Jake asked. Danny looked up from the complex alien machinery. "The good news is that Zephyrian shields are incredibly powerful. The bad news is they weren't designed for human ships and they drain energy like crazy. We'll probably get about 20 minutes of shield protection before the power systems overload." 20 minutes didn't sound like much time for a space battle, but Jake knew it was better than nothing. Without shields, their converted ships would be destroyed instantly by Zephyrian weapons. With shields, they might survive long enough to fire a few shots of their own. Katie Sullivan entered the engineering bay carrying a datapad with the latest intelligence reports from Ben Carter. "The Zephyrian Armada is almost fully assembled," she told Jake. "Ben counts over 8,000 ships at Zephyr Prime, with more arriving every day." Jake felt his stomach tighten. Even with all their modifications, the human fleet would be outnumbered more than 100 to 1. The mathematics of the situation were impossible, but they were committed now. "What about the timing of their attack?" Jake asked. "Ben thinks they'll begin the final cleansing in 10 days, Katie replied. "All human colonies will be hit simultaneously using hyperspace jumps coordinated from their command center." Admiral Lisa Grant approached their group carrying a tactical display showing the planned attack routes. She had spent the last week organizing the human fleet into combat formations. "Despite having ships that were never designed to fight together, I've divided our forces into 3 wings," Grant explained. "Fast attack squadrons led by pilots like Alex Thompson and Maria Gonzalez will hit their outer defenses first. Heavy assault groups commanded by Steve Parker and Lisa Wong will target their capital ships. Support wings managed by Nina Torres will provide supplies and rescue operations." Jake studied the formation charts. "What about command and control? How do we coordinate an attack when our ships don't even have compatible communication systems?" Ben Carter joined the discussion carrying a modified Zephyrian communication device. "I've been working on that problem. This equipment will let us tap into their military networks and coordinate our movements using their own systems against them." "Won't they detect unauthorized transmissions?" Hayes asked. Ben smiled grimly. "Not if the transmissions are coming from inside their command center. I'm going back to Zephyr Prime to coordinate the attack from within their own headquarters." Jake grabbed Ben's arm. "That's suicide. If they catch you, they'll torture you to death slowly." "If we don't try this, everyone dies anyway," Ben replied. "Besides, I've been planning this for years. I know every security protocol and guard rotation in that facility." Over the following days, the human fleet conducted training exercises in the empty space around the asteroid base. The results were mixed at best. Many of the converted ships had handling problems due to the added weight of Zephyrian weapons. Communication between vessels was difficult and several near collisions occurred during formation flying. Alex Thompson was one of their best pilots, but even he struggled with the modified controls. "These ships handle like freight trains with rocket engines," he complained after a particularly rough training session. "The weapon systems are powerful, but they're so heavy that maneuverability is almost impossible." Maria Gonzalez had similar problems with her converted transport. "The plasma cannons work great when they fire," she reported. "But the power drain is enormous and the cooling systems can't handle sustained combat. After a few shots, we'll have to withdraw and recharge." Despite the problems, Amy Rodriguez and her engineering teams continued making improvements. They developed new power management systems that could extend shield duration and weapon firing time. They also created emergency repair kits that could fix battle damage quickly. Jake spent most of his time in the command center, studying intelligence reports and tactical data. The Zephyrian home system was heavily fortified with defense platforms, patrol ships, and automated weapon satellites. Even catching them by surprise, the human fleet would face enormous opposition. "There's something else we need to consider," Colonel Hayes said during a strategy meeting. "What happens if we actually succeed in disrupting their operations? The Zephyrians won't just give up and go home. They'll hunt down every human in the galaxy to make us pay for this attack." Katie looked up from her tactical calculations. "So we make sure they can't hunt anyone down." "We don't just disrupt their operations, we destroy their entire command structure." "You mean kill their leadership?" Grant asked. "All of it," Katie replied firmly. "Supreme Admiral Kethvar, his staff officers, their communication networks, their command ships. We tear apart their ability to coordinate any kind of response." Jake realized she was right. This couldn't be a hit-and-run attack designed to buy time. It had to be a decapitation strike that eliminated the Zephyrian military's ability to function. Either they destroyed their enemies completely, or they guaranteed that any surviving humans would face extinction. Amy Rodriguez announced that the final modifications were complete. 71 ships had been successfully converted to combat. Status: another dozen vessels would serve as supply ships and rescue craft. It was a tiny fleet by galactic standards, but it represented every free human willing to fight. The night before departure, Jake walked through the asteroid base saying goodbye to the people who had chosen to stay behind. Elderly humans, children. And those too injured to fight would remain in the hidden base, hoping to survive whatever came next. An old woman named Mrs. Patterson approached Jake as he prepared to board his ship. She had been a teacher before the Zephyrians enslaved her colony 50 years ago. "Captain Morrison," she said quietly, "I want you to know that win or lose, you've given us something we haven't had in 3 centuries. "What's that?" Jake asked. "Hope," she replied. "For the first time since my grandmother was born, we're fighting back instead of just surviving. That means something regardless of what happens tomorrow." Jake nodded and climbed aboard his modified command ship. Katie was already at the navigation console preparing their jump coordinates. The rest of the human fleet was forming up around them, 71 converted vessels crewed by former slaves who had chosen to die as free people. "All ships report ready," Grant announced over the communication system. "Destination Zephyr Prime, home system of the Zephyrian Imperium." Jake took a deep breath and gave the order that would either save humanity or guarantee its extinction. "Begin hyperspace jump. All ships follow Formation Alpha. May we find our enemies where we expect them." The human fleet disappeared into hyperspace, carrying 3,000 volunteers toward a battle that military strategists would consider impossible. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and flying ships held together with hope and desperation. But they were no longer slaves, and that made all the difference. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyr system and immediately faced a sight that would have terrified any sane military commander. Thousands of Zephyrian warships filled the space around their homeworld like a deadly metal cloud. The enemy armada stretched across millions of kilometers with vessels ranging from small destroyers to massive dreadnoughts that could destroy planets. Jake Morrison stared at the tactical display on his command ship bridge, feeling his mouth go dry. Even knowing what to expect, the reality was overwhelming. "Katie, how many ships are we detecting?" he asked his tactical officer. Katie Sullivan worked frantically at her sensor station, trying to get accurate readings. "At least 9,000 vessels in close formation around Zephyr Prime," she reported. "Maybe more hiding behind the larger ships. Jake, their flagship is the size of a small moon." Supreme Admiral Kethvar received the first reports of human ships approaching his system with complete disbelief. He stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominance, a crystalline warship 5 kilometers long that served as the centerpiece of Zephyrian military power. His aide, a nervous young officer, approached with a datapad. "Sir, our outer sensors detect approximately 70 unknown vessels approaching the system," the aide reported. "They appear to be of human construction, but they're armed with our technology." Kethvar's crystalline face showed no emotion, but his voice carried centuries of arrogance. Impossible. Humans are incapable of space warfare. They are mining slaves and cargo haulers, not warriors. Send a destroyer squadron to investigate and capture the vessels for study. The first engagement began when 12 Zephyrian destroyers moved to intercept the approaching human fleet. Commander Lisa Grant led her fast attack wing directly toward the enemy ships while Jake held back the main force. Alex Thompson and Maria Gonzalez piloted converted mining vessels that looked like scrap metal compared to the sleek alien destroyers. All attack ships prepare for combat, Grant ordered over the communication system. Remember, hit them hard and fast, then get out before they can respond. Alex Thompson's modified hauler opened fire first, sending streams of stolen Zephyrian plasma toward the lead destroyer. The enemy ship's shields flared as the powerful weapons struck, but the damage was minimal. Their shields are holding, Alex reported. These things are tougher than we thought. Maria Gonzalez came in from a different angle, firing her plasma cannons in continuous bursts. The power drain was enormous, but her concentrated fire began to overload the destroyer's shield system. I'm getting through, she announced. But my power levels are dropping fast. The Zephyrian destroyer captain was shocked when human weapons began penetrating his shields. He had expected to face mining equipment and improvised explosives, not military-grade plasma cannons. All ships focus fire on the lead human vessel, he ordered. Destroy them immediately. 12 destroyers fired simultaneously at Alex Thompson's ship. His stolen Zephyrian shields held for exactly 18 seconds before overloading in a cascade of sparking energy. The next salvo tore through his hull like paper, and his ship exploded in a brief flash of light, but Alex had bought enough time for the other attack ships to close range. Steve Parker led the heavy assault group in a coordinated strike that caught the Zephyrian formation off guard. His modified cargo hauler was armed with the most powerful weapons Amy Rodriguez had been able to install. This is for Alex, Parker growled as he fired everything his ship had at the nearest destroyer. The alien vessel's shields collapsed under the massive energy discharge, and secondary explosions rippled along its hull. It was the first Zephyrian warship destroyed by human weapons in over 3 centuries. The news of a destroyed destroyer reached Supreme Admiral Kethvar within minutes. He stared at the tactical display showing the wreckage of one of his ships with something approaching concern. How did primitive humans destroy a military vessel? He demanded. They appear to have modified their ships with our own weapon systems, his aide replied nervously. Our destroyed technology combined with human engineering techniques we don't understand, Kethvar nodded slowly. The humans had proven more resourceful than expected, but they were still vastly outnumbered. Deploy 2 battle groups to eliminate the human fleet, he ordered. Use overwhelming force to ensure none of them escape. 400 Zephyrian warships moved to engage the human force while Jake Morrison watched from his command ship. The mathematics were hopeless, but his people were fighting with desperate courage that surprised even him. Lisa Wong led her heavy assault squadron in a suicide charge that destroyed 3 more enemy vessels before her ship was torn apart by return fire. Jake, we're losing ships faster than we can replace them, Katie reported. We've destroyed 6 enemy vessels, but they've killed 15 of ours. Jake realized they needed to change tactics or the battle would be over in minutes. All ships concentrate on their command vessels, he ordered. Ignore the smaller ships and target anything that looks like it's coordinating their movements. Ben Carter was working frantically inside the Zephyrian command center on Zephyr Prime, trying to disrupt their communications without being detected. He had spent 15 years learning their systems, and now he began introducing subtle errors into their tactical data. Enemy ships started receiving conflicting orders and overlapping movement commands. The confusion spread through the Zephyrian fleet as ships began to interfere with each other's operations. 2 battle cruisers collided when they received identical navigation coordinates. A destroyer squadron fired on their own support ships after their targeting computers were fed false identification data. What is happening to our fleet coordination? Kethvar demanded as reports of friendly fire incidents flooded his command center. "Unknown, sir," his aide replied while trying to restore normal communications. "Our tactical networks appear to be experiencing systematic failures." Jake Morrison saw the enemy formation beginning to fall apart and seized the opportunity. "All ships advance to close range," he ordered. "They're confused and disorganized. Hit them now while they can't coordinate." A response. The human fleet charged directly into the heart of the Zephyrian formation like a spear thrust aimed at their command ships. Danny Clark piloted a converted transport loaded with every explosive device Amy Rodriguez could build. He guided his ship toward the largest enemy vessel in the formation, knowing he would not survive the impact. "Tell my family I died free," Danny transmitted as he crashed his explosive-laden ship into the Zephyrian battle cruiser. The resulting explosion tore the massive alien vessel in half and sent debris flying through the enemy formation. Maria Gonzalez led her remaining attack ships in strafing runs against enemy communication arrays, while Nina Torres coordinated rescue operations to save the crews of damaged human vessels. Every minute of continued fighting was paid for with the lives of former slaves who refused to surrender. The battle reached a critical moment when Jake Morrison realized their only chance was to target the Zephyrian flagship directly. The Eternal Dominance was the center of enemy command and control. If they could damage or destroy it, the entire enemy fleet might lose coordination. "Katie, plot a course directly for their flagship," Jake ordered. "We're going to ram that thing with everything we have left." Katie stared at him in shock. "Jake, that ship is 5 kilometers long and protected by the heaviest shields in their fleet. We'll be destroyed before we get within weapons range." "Maybe," Jake replied grimly. "But if we can damage their command center, it might disrupt the final cleansing operation. Even if we all die here, it could save the human colonies." The surviving human ships formed up behind Jake's command vessel and began their final desperate charge toward the heart of Zephyrian military power. They had started the battle with 71 ships and now had less than 30 still combat-capable. But those 30 vessels carried 3 centuries of rage and the determination of people who had nothing left to lose. Supreme Admiral Kethvar watched the human fleet approaching his flagship and felt something he had never experienced before in his 1,000 years of military service: uncertainty. These primitive slaves had already done the impossible by destroying Zephyrian warships in open combat. Now they were attempting something even more insane. "All defensive systems target the human command ship," Kethvar ordered. "Destroy them before they reach weapons range." The Eternal Dominance unleashed the full power of its defensive systems as the human fleet charged toward the massive flagship. Hundreds of plasma cannons fired simultaneously, creating a wall of deadly energy that should have vaporized anything approaching the ship. But Jake Morrison's command vessel somehow survived the initial barrage with its stolen Zephyrian shields flickering but holding. "Shields at 15% and falling fast," Katie Sullivan reported as explosions rocked their ship. "We won't survive another volley like that." Jake gripped his command chair as the ship shook around him. Through the bridge windows he could see the Eternal Dominance growing larger as they closed the distance. The alien flagship was enormous beyond comprehension, its crystalline hull reflecting the light of battle like a deadly jewel floating in space. Supreme Admiral Kethvar stood on his bridge watching the human ships approach with growing amazement. His weapons had destroyed most of the attacking fleet, but somehow a core group of vessels continued advancing despite taking damage that should have disabled them completely. "How are they still functional?" he demanded from his tactical officer. "Our sensors show massive hull breaches and power system failures on every human ship." "Unknown, sir," the officer replied while studying the readings. "Their ships appear to be held together by emergency repairs and pure determination. By all logical analysis, they should have exploded minutes ago." Ben Carter was working frantically in the Zephyrian command center trying to create as much confusion as possible in their defensive systems. He had managed to introduce targeting errors that caused some of their weapons to miss, but the flagship's shields were too powerful for him to disable remotely. Suddenly Ben realized he had one more option. that he had been saving as a last resort. Hidden in his maintenance kit were explosive charges he had been planning to use on the command center's main computer systems. If he detonated them now, it would destroy the communication hub that coordinated the entire Zephyrian fleet. "Jake, I hope you can hear this," Ben transmitted on a hidden frequency. "I'm about to create a big distraction. When their communications go down, you'll have maybe 5 minutes before they can restore coordination." Ben placed his explosive charges around the primary communication array and set the timer for 30 seconds. He had known for years that this mission would probably be his last, but he felt calm knowing that his sacrifice might save his people. The explosion tore through the command center like thunder, destroying computer systems and communication arrays in a cascade of sparking debris. Emergency lights flickered on as smoke filled the air and Zephyrian officers ran to damage control stations. "Sir, we've lost primary communications," Kethvar's aide reported. "All fleet coordination is down. Individual ships are reverting to autonomous operation." Kethvar felt something he had never experienced in 1,000 years of military service: panic without central coordination. His massive fleet was just a collection of individual ships with no unified command structure. "Restore communications immediately," he ordered. Jake Morrison saw the enemy fleet suddenly lose its coordinated movement patterns and realized this was their moment. "All ships target the flagship shield generators," he ordered. "Ben just gave us our only chance." The surviving human vessels concentrated their fire on specific points along the Eternal Dominance's hull where Amy Rodriguez had identified the shield generator locations. The modified plasma weapons designed for mining asteroids began to overload the alien defensive systems through sheer concentrated firepower. Lisa Grant led her remaining ships in a synchronized attack that finally breached the flagship's shields. "Shields are down on the primary target," she reported. "All ships focus fire on their command section." Danny Clark had been piloting a cargo hauler, converted into a massive kinetic projectile loaded with every explosive device the human engineers could build. When he saw the flagship shields collapse, he made his final decision. "This is for every human who died in their mines," Danny transmitted as he guided his ship directly toward the Eternal Dominance's command tower. The collision sent shockwaves through both vessels as Danny's explosives detonated inside the alien flagship's most critical systems. The massive Zephyrian vessel began to break apart as cascade failures spread through its power systems. Secondary explosions rippled along the hull as the ship's crystalline structure fractured under the stress. Supreme Admiral Kethvar found himself thrown to the floor as his bridge filled with smoke and sparking debris. "Abandoned ship," someone was shouting, but Kethvar could barely hear over the sound of collapsing bulkheads. The unthinkable was happening. His flagship, the most powerful warship in the galaxy, was being destroyed by primitive human mining equipment. The death of the Eternal Dominance sent panic through the entire Zephyrian fleet. Without their supreme commander and with communications still disrupted, individual ship captains began making contradictory decisions. Some tried to continue the attack while others moved to defensive positions around Zephyr Prime. Jake Morrison watched the enemy flagship break apart and felt no satisfaction, only grim determination. "Katie, what's the status of their fleet?" he asked. "Complete chaos," Katie replied while studying her sensors. "They're receiving conflicting orders from multiple sources and their formation is falling apart. Some ships are trying to retreat while others are still attacking." Commander Grant led her remaining ships in pursuit of fleeing enemy vessels while Colonel Hayes coordinated boarding parties to capture damaged Zephyrian ships. The aliens were so shocked by their losses that many vessels surrendered without resistance when faced with determined human boarding teams. On Zephyr Prime, the destruction of the Eternal Dominance triggered uprisings among human slaves and other oppressed species throughout the planet. The news that the invincible Zephyrian military had been defeated spread like wildfire through slave quarters and work camps. Amy Rodriguez had survived the battle in one of the engineering support ships and was already analyzing captured enemy technology. "Jake, their shield and weapon systems are even more advanced than we thought," she reported. If we can reverse engineer this equipment, we could build a real fleet. The remnants of the human attack force regrouped around the wreckage of the Eternal Dominance, while scattered Zephyrian ships continued fleeing the system. What had started as a desperate suicide mission was turning into something impossible. An actual military victory against overwhelming odds. "Sir," Katie called out excitedly, "I'm receiving surrender transmissions from over 200 enemy vessels. They're requesting terms for unconditional surrender." Jake stared at the tactical display showing Zephyrian warships with their weapons powered down waiting for human response. 3 hours ago, these same vessels had been preparing to commit genocide against his entire species. Now they were begging for mercy from the slaves they had tried to exterminate. "Maria." Gonzalez's voice came over the communication system from her damaged attack ship. "Jake, what are your orders regarding the surrendering enemy vessels?" Jake realized that this moment would define not just the outcome of the battle, but the future of human-alien relations throughout the galaxy. His people had proven they could fight and win against superior technology through determination and desperate courage. Now they had to decide what kind of victors they would be. The impossible had happened. The galaxy's strongest military force had been defeated by a single human fleet. But the real test was just beginning as humanity faced the responsibilities that came with their unexpected victory. "Accept all surrenders," Jake ordered. "But make it clear that any ship that tries to resume hostilities will be destroyed immediately." The Battle of Zephyr Prime was over. The war for human freedom had just begun. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his damaged command ship watching Zephyrian vessels surrender across the entire system. The tactical display showed over 300 enemy ships with their weapons powered down and their crews requesting terms. It was a sight that would have been impossible to imagine just hours before. Katie Sullivan worked frantically at her communication station, trying to coordinate with the surrendering alien vessels. "Jake, we're receiving surrender requests faster than we can process them," she reported. "Some of their ship captains are actually offering to help us hunt down the vessels that are still trying to escape." The collapse of Zephyrian military discipline was complete. Without Supreme Admiral Kethvar and with their communication networks destroyed, the rigid hierarchy that had held their empire together for 1,000 years was falling apart. Individual ship captains were making desperate attempts to save themselves and their crews. Commander Lisa Grant led her remaining ships in pursuit of fleeing Zephyrian vessels throughout the outer system. Many of the enemy ships were faster than the converted human vessels, but they were also panicked and making navigational errors that allowed Grant's pilots to catch them. "This is Grant to all pursuit squadrons," she transmitted. "Remember, we want them to surrender if possible. Every ship we capture is another vessel we can use to protect human colonies." Maria Gonzalez was piloting one of the few attack ships still combat-capable after the battle. Her target was a Zephyrian destroyer that had been trying to escape toward the hyperspace jump point. "Zephyrian vessel, this is the human warship Freedom's Edge," she transmitted. "Surrender immediately or we will destroy you." The alien destroyer captain responded with shock evident in his voice. "Human warship, that is impossible. Humans do not possess military vessels." "We do now," Maria replied grimly. "Your flagship is debris and your supreme commander is dead. Surrender or join them." The destroyer powered down its weapons and requested terms for surrender. Across the system, similar scenes were playing out as the most powerful military in the galaxy submitted to former slaves flying converted mining equipment. On Zephyr Prime, the news of military defeat had triggered planet-wide uprisings among human slaves and other oppressed species. Amy Rodriguez monitored the surface communications from her engineering ship and provided regular updates to Jake. "The slave quarters are in open revolt," she reported. "Human workers have taken control of 3 major mining facilities and they're broadcasting surrender demands to any Zephyrian authorities who will listen." Jake realized that their military victory was only the beginning. The entire Zephyrian empire was built on the forced labor of conquered species. With their military defeated, the subject populations were rising up throughout their territory. Ben Carter had died in his explosion at the command center, but his sacrifice had accomplished more than just disrupting their communications. Hidden programs he had planted in their computer systems were now activating across the Empire, sending false orders and creating chaos in Zephyrian administrative networks. "Sir," Katie called out from her station, "I'm receiving reports from human colonies throughout 3 star systems. Zephyrian garrison forces are surrendering without resistance. They're saying their orders are to avoid any confrontation with human military forces." Jake almost smiled at the irony. The Zephyrians were so shocked by their defeat that they were treating converted cargo haulers and mining ships as if they were an unstoppable armada. Fear was accomplishing what weapons alone could never have achieved. Colonel Hayes had been coordinating boarding operations on captured enemy vessels, and his reports were encouraging. "The alien crews are cooperative once they realize we're not going to execute them," he told Jake. "Many of them seem relieved that the war is over." "What about their technology?" Jake asked. "Can we operate their ships?" Hayes nodded enthusiastically. "Amy's engineering teams are already figuring out their control systems. These vessels are incredibly advanced compared to anything we've ever had. With proper training, we could field a real space navy within months." The strategic implications were enormous. The human resistance had started the battle with 71 converted civilian vessels. They were ending it with hundreds of advanced military ships and thousands of Zephyrian prisoners who possessed detailed knowledge of alien technology. Admiral Grant returned from her pursuit mission with a convoy of captured enemy vessels. "We got most of the ones that tried to run," she reported. "A few ships made it to hyperspace, but the majority of their fleet is now under our control." Jake studied the tactical display showing their captured vessels. Former human slaves were already boarding the alien ships with Amy's technical teams to begin learning how to operate advanced military equipment. It would take time, but they now had the foundation for a real space fleet. "What are your orders regarding the Zephyrian homeworld?" Grant asked. "Their planetary government is requesting negotiations." Jake realized this was the most important decision he would ever make. Humanity had won an impossible victory against overwhelming odds, but now they faced the challenge of what to do with their conquest. They could seek revenge for 3 centuries of slavery, or they could try to build something better. Open communications with their planetary leadership, Jake decided. But make it clear that any attempts at deception or treachery will result in the immediate destruction of their remaining military assets. The Zephyrian Chancellor appeared on the main display screen, his crystalline features showing what Jake had learned to recognize as fear and confusion. "Human Commander, I am Chancellor Vector of the Zephyrian Imperium. We request terms for the cessation of hostilities." "The Zephyrian Imperium is finished," Jake replied firmly. "Your military is defeated, your colonies are in revolt, and your empire is collapsing. The question is whether you want to survive as individuals or be remembered as the leadership that chose extinction over surrender." The Chancellor's crystalline form flickered with what appeared to be distress. "What are your terms for our survival?" Jake had been thinking about this moment throughout the battle. Complete independence for all human colonies and settlements. Full citizenship rights for any humans who choose to remain in former Zephyrian territory. Reparations to be paid to human communities for 3 centuries of forced labor. And the establishment of a new galactic council with representation for all species. "These terms are acceptable," the Chancellor replied quickly. "But what guarantee do we have that humans will not seek revenge for past actions?" "The same guarantee you gave us for 300 years, Katie said before Jake could respond. "None whatsoever. You'll have to trust that we're better people than you were." Jake decided that Katie had answered perfectly. The Zephyrians would have to live with uncertainty the same way humans had lived as slaves. But unlike their former masters, humanity would prove that strength could be combined with mercy. Over the following week's news of the human victory spread throughout the galaxy like wildfire. Other oppressed species began their own revolts against alien overlords, while neutral civilizations rushed to establish diplomatic relations with the new human government. Jake Morrison found himself appointed as the first admiral of the Human Liberation Fleet, a military organization dedicated to protecting not just human colonies but any species threatened by larger predatory civilizations. It was a responsibility he had never wanted, but one he accepted as the price of victory. Amy Rodriguez had been promoted to Chief Technology Officer and was leading efforts to reverse engineer captured Zephyrian equipment. Her teams were already developing improved versions of alien weapons and shield systems. Adapted specifically for human vessels, the impossible had become reality. In a single desperate battle, a fleet of converted civilian ships had destroyed the most powerful military in the galaxy. Former slaves had become the protectors of the oppressed throughout known space. Jake stood on the bridge of his new flagship, a captured Zephyrian dreadnought that his crew had renamed Ben's Revenge in honor of their fallen friend. Through the viewports he could see dozens of human vessels conducting patrol operations around Zephyr Prime. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had earned its place not through technological superiority or numerical advantage, but through the simple refusal to accept defeat. They had proven that sometimes the greatest victories come from the most desperate circumstances. The age of human slavery was over. The era of human leadership among the stars had begun.